Hi and welcome to the fourth in the 365 Days of Compassion videos, taking a look at compassion focused therapy and compassionate mind training. My name's Chris and I'm doing these videos to share what I've learnt around CFT and maybe to share something that might be helpful. I'm not a trained professional, this is my experience of using CFT and a compassionate mind approach to help with depression, and I'm certainly not selling or advocating anything, but hopefully you'll find something that's helpful. So in this episode I'm going to look at a key concept and I think a pivotal part of a compassionate mind approach, and that is the compassionate self. So it completely builds upon the three concepts that we've talked about in the last couple of videos. So compassion as a motivation, the three emotional systems, and the three flows of compassion. Recently somebody posted on our Facebook group a question around the compassionate self, kind of saying, well, isn't this just yourself? It is. It's a I guess a psychological concept that we have multiple selves. We have a happy self, a sad self, an anxious self, an angry self, a confident self, and so on. And often one of these selves can dominate our thinking and influence our behaviour or actions, depending on context and on different days. Obviously, I guess that doesn't mean that we switch from one self to another. We're obviously a blend of those selves. It's just that sometimes one of those can be very dominant. So why do we need to focus on the compassionate self? I think it's probably because it's one of those that doesn't come to the fore as much, particularly I'm thinking towards ourselves. So part of the compassionate mind training approach is to spend a little bit of time about thinking about what compassion means to you, and in terms of the compassionate self, how is that embodied, and this is all with a view of perhaps looking to how to deepen our approach to that compassionate self, and fundamentally also how can it be more helpful to our own well-being, and to others of course as well. So how to do this? Well, one first step is to perhaps consider what a compassionate self is like. What kind of attributes, what qualities does it have? For some people this is easier to do than for others, which depends on personal history and the environments around you, experience, etc. So you could consider a time when you were compassionate towards somebody else, perhaps a friend or a loved one. So what kind of behaviours did you show? What was the tone of your voice like? What actions did you do? It's also very useful to reflect perhaps how did you feel during that time and then afterwards as well. Perhaps a further step on from that is to consider when you've offered or performed a compassion act to somebody who you didn't know. Were there any differences in how that felt in the behaviours that you did? Maybe even to somebody you didn't like. Alternatively, you can consider when you've received compassion from someone else. What did that look like? What were their behaviours towards you? Again, what was their tone of voice? How did it make you feel? As I said, for some people this can be quite hard to do, so it can be an easier approach to think about a public figure, or maybe even a fictional character that for you embodies compassion. And so it could be somebody from a book or a movie. Again, it's really just trying to focus on, for you, what resonates in that character or that person in a compassionate way. And what we're looking to do as part of this kind of thought exercise is what are the kind of attributes, the qualities that that brings to mind? What would that mean from a compassionate self point of view? I'm going to highlight a couple of ones that I think are quite key, and I'll try and kind of explain each one as well. So the ones I'm going to focus on are attention, wisdom, caring commitment, and courage. So attention. Our attention is easily grabbed by many things. We live in an age of multiple and often very easy distractions. And often they can be things that aren't as helpful to our well-being. Just consider how easily our attention is grabbed by our threat system. So this part of our compassionate self is about bringing focus to things which perhaps nourish us, replenish us. So this could be about bringing a focus and our attention to things which we're grateful for, things that we're looking forward to, or perhaps reflecting on past times, particularly perhaps connections which have been beneficial for us. The second one I mentioned was wisdom, and I think compassionate wisdom is an ability to be able to pause and really consider what would be helpful, because sometimes our first reaction to try and help somebody or even ourselves may not be the most wisest or most appropriate one. I think this also includes the ability to recognise and be aware of what we are responsible for and accountable for, but also fundamentally and very importantly what we are not responsible for. The next part is quite challenging, I think, from a wisdom point of view, because I think it can help us to understand pain and suffering, and that includes within ourselves, and that can be quite difficult to kind of face. It's part of being human, and everyone experiences challenging times to varying degrees, and therefore I think the wisdom can bring an element of pain with it, which is where the next part I think helps, which is a commitment to caring. Our compassionate self takes a non-judgmental, nurturing and a kind approach to supporting our attention and our wisdom. This caring attribute is probably the one that probably featured most highly if you go through that thought exercise about the kind of attributes, particularly when offering compassion to somebody else or receiving compassion. But how about to yourself though? How often are we motivated by caring for ourselves? And to be clear, this is different from being just kind to yourself. It is a motivation to act in a caring way, an intention to do help rather than to harm. Now, sometimes that can mean that we do some things which might be challenging for us, which leads us on to the fourth one that I mentioned, which is courage. Now, courage is a big old word, and it can mean many things. But for me, when we talk about it in a compassionate self point of view, it is underpinning the commitment to work with distress, whether that's within ourselves or within others, but without being overwhelmed, and responding with wise care. And I think that's why, for me, courage is a key part of what we're trying to deepen within the compassionate self, the ability to tolerate distress. So that's kind of a bit of a thought exercise around the compassionate self and some of the kind of attributes and qualities that I really do kind of think about. So what does that actually look like in daily life? So personally, my compassionate self is something that I deliberately try to focus on as much as possible, and especially at difficult times. Some people use imagery to help, to envisage what their compassionate self looks like, and I'm going to cover imagery in a future episode. So I'm going to try and give an example. It's a very relevant and timely one. After the last video, I went into a bit of a low mood, what I term an echo of depression, and I really wanted to record this video earlier this week, in line with the other ones that I've done. And perhaps I might have done without stopping to just listen to my compassionate self. So I thought it was more wise to take a little bit more time and to let a few more days pass, and then to do this recording, so allowing myself to care for myself, and then actually also to be in a better position to actually do this video. Doing these videos isn't easy. It's very vulnerable for many reasons, and it's important for me to do that personally. So my compassionate self brings the courage to do it. I'm not sure if that makes sense. I hope it does. And it's just a very brief example of how the compassionate self can help you. So from this point on in the video series, I'm going to move on to some exercises and techniques that help with developing things like the compassionate self and building on those concepts that we've covered. And these are things that will hopefully might be of interest and will help in daily life. I'm going to be using two books that really have helped. I mentioned one last time, which was Dr. Mary Welford's book. And the other book I'm going to mention, which is the Compassionate Mind Workbook by Dr. Chris Irons and Dr. Elaine Beaumont. I think this is a superb book. It is jam-packed full of some very great ways to develop and maintain the compassionate self. So I hope that's been another useful video. Thanks for watching. Take care.